Nuestra siguiente ponente.
Thank you very much, Iñaki. Now we have Gemma Del Caño. Now she has a degree in pharmacy and she's specialized in industry, and she spends a lot of her time carrying out scientific outreach activities, trying to debunk different myths. And she also collaborates with Incontable Medias, and in fact she's ever met Ana Rosa, who's a very famous TV personality here in Spain. And she took science to Channel 5 of the Spanish television, which I think is a feat in and of itself. So, warm round of applause, please, for Gemma.
Arratsaldeon, buenas tardes, good evening.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Okay, now, we're going to talk about when alcohol saved a life. Now, maybe you're thinking about this, no? When these lovely San Bernard dogs used to go up in the Alps and they would save people who have gotten lost in the snow. We all know that this is absolutely it's a lie. It's Edwin Lardser's fault because he basically made it up in order to fill in a gap that he had in this painting that he was doing. We see there, we can see the different mastiffs who were saving someone, and they've got a little barrel around their necks, and so we just basically have spent years believing this myth that there are San Bernards out there taking alcohol in a little barrel to people to save their lives. Now that we know that alcohol make your blood vessels expand, and in fact it would, if you drank alcohol when you were cold, you'd die beforehand. But we're not going to talk about this. Let's go to a cold place in the world. I'm going to the Antarctic. It doesn't belong to anyone. There are 29 countries who are there, but it doesn't belong to any country. There are no laws. Each station has its own law. And I would like us to go to Amundsen Scott Station, which is right in the middle. Now, there's a place where a lot of scientists and technicians do their science. This is what it looks like. That's the dome. Underneath the dome, there are two entire floors, which are underneath the ice. And in winter, which is mainly from March to October, there are about 50 people there inside that station. We've got scientists and technicians. Now, Antarctica measures 14,000 kilometers squared. And there are about 5,000 people there. In Europe, there are 10 million kilometers squared, so you can just get an idea. It's much bigger than Europe. So, winter arrives, and we're going back to the year 2000. What happened in the year 2000? There were these 50 people, 10 scientists, 40 technicians. They get a load of material, and they get ready to withstand 7 months of total isolation. 6 months of total darkness. No one's going to be able to get in by plane or by boat. They're going to be totally isolated there for 7 months, completely alone. Now, to make it a bit easier, they use hydroponic crops because no one's going to be able to bring them food, so they need to have some kind of fresh food. So they have that. That's not too bad. They grow them on shelves. Don't need soil. A lot of, during the summer, you get a lot of planes flying in, and they take a lot of material there. And above all, and the most importantly, they have alcohol. Huge amounts of alcohol. I mean, ridiculous amounts of alcohol. Cans of beer, bottles of spirits, ridiculous amounts of alcohol. Now, I can see people nodding their heads, right? Well, you know what I'm talking about. Well, as well as all of this, you have hydroponic crops, and they've got, wild parties and all these great things. They have a sub-millimeter telescope, which is there. It's for remote observations. What this sub-millimetric telescope does is measures radiation of the waves that are emitted in the areas where stars are being formed. And I'm not going to say anything more about this telescope because I'm not a professional, and there's a lot of professionals in the room, and I'm not going to say anything more about it. But the person who did know much more about this telescope is a bloke called Rodney Marks. He had a PhD in astrophysics. He's the only person who knew how to use this submillimetric telescope. So, Rodney was a pretty interesting person. He was Australian, age 32. Back then, he's got a rock group, a rock band in Australia, another rock band at the station. And there's his girlfriend, who's called Sonia. Now, often, when people go for 7 months, and they're going to be there, they find themselves an ice wife. So someone to help them, spend those 7 months of isolation, but not in this case, because they were kindred spirits, and so he didn't. She wasn't just an ice wife; she was much more than that. But not everything was great in Rodney's life. He's a mathematician, an astrophysicist. He's got a fantastic girlfriend. He's got 7 months in total isolation. He's doing what he loves. But Rodney Marks also had Tourette's syndrome. Now, I'm sure this rings a bell, no? Because some comedy series, someone often has a Tourette's syndrome, but it just means that they swear consistently and constantly, and they have lots of tics. Rodney Marks, what he did, we used to touch his nose all the time, and he'd found a way to try to keep that under control, his Tourette's syndrome, and basically he just drank alcohol, and that kept it under control. You can see where the problem is, right? He wasn't an alcoholic, although he was a habitual drinker, which basically means alcoholic, but you can't say that anymore. But it didn't affect his work, apparently. And there was no one, in fact, no one has actually had to be brought back because of having alcoholic or problems with alcohol. Rodney Marks actually gave talks in English about astrophysics, and he taught people French, and he was a person who really bound the group together. Here we can see him. He's doing his science stuff with his telescope, his submillimetric telescope. Now, 36 hours after that photograph was taken, he was dead. He used to have to walk for about 1 kilometre to get to the telescope. So there was sort of a 1 kilometre distance from the dome to the telescope. He didn't feel very well. He felt a bit queasy. Lights were annoying him. Anyway, he went to the medical centre. So it was basically a primary care centre, an emergency care room, and he said, "I'm not feeling too well." He said, "I have, been 38 hours without drinking, and I don't feel very well." Now the doctor thought, "Well, you've probably just got abstinence syndrome. If you've, 38 hours without having a drink, you're probably, suffering withdrawal symptoms." He gave him a sedative, and he sent him off to sleep. Well, he went to have dinner. He had a bit of chicken, had a beer, didn't feel very well. He tried to go to sleep, but he woke up a lot during the night. He started vomiting blood. He felt very anxious. His vision was blurry. So he went back to the doctors, and the doctor then said to him, "Okay, what you've got is polar madness." So when you have people who are there isolated for 7 months, in order to get there, to get given a place on the station, you have to be a sociable person, but you have to be able to withstand that level of isolation. It's almost like going to space. So the doctor then said to him, "Right, well, you've got seasonal dissociative syndrome, basically polar madness." He gave him an anti-anxiety pill and sent him off to sleep. And just some hours later, he had a heart attack and he died at the age of 32. In May, this was May, but obviously no one can go and pick him up. So his colleagues, they're completely isolated, of course. They just take him outside. They put him outside. It's minus 62 degrees outside. So after, they don't feel great about this, and so they make him a coffin with the bits of wood that they have hanging around. And they have to wait for conditions to get better. This happened on the 30th of October. From May, Rodney Marks has been outside in a sort of frozen coffin. Now, when the autopsy was performed, they realised that actually he had food poisoning, but from methanol. He had a huge amount of methanol, 150 millilitres in his body. 10 millilitres will leave you blind. 30 millilitres will, create bigger problems. But 100 millilitres, you're probably going to die. 150 millilitres, that's it, you're dead. There's nothing can be done. If the doctor had actually probably seen the connection, he'd have realised that methanol poisoning causes nausea, vomiting, etc., etc. What happens with methanol then? Methanol, the alcohol dehydrogenase acts on the methanol to form formaldehyde, and that's completely toxic for our body. So what happened? Why didn't they realise that this was happening? Why didn't the doctor realise? And in fact, they had a machine to analyse their blood. If they'd done a blood draw and analysed his blood, they might have detected that something was going on there. I don't know, they might not have been able to save his life, but they would have known what was going on. But the problem was that machine, the lithium batteries didn't work very well. And you had to plug it in to the mains, and then it had to calibrate itself, and it took ages and ages. So the doctor thought that it probably wasn't worthwhile. If he'd seen what was going on, if he'd realised that he had methanol poisoning, that he'd have known that there is a drug that could have helped, or another solution would have been to have a 10% solution of ethanol. Basically the wine that we've seen before. Well, not wine itself, but, something like that. But what happened? Well, methyl alcohol with alcohol dehydrogenase makes formaldehyde, which is toxic, but if we add ethylic alcohol, then we get acetic acid, and that's okay. So, that's very simple. So, alcohol dehydrogenase goes off with the methanol, and so it gets rid of it. So, why am I talking about this? Well, because there are a lot of people who die from methanol poisoning, because it's formed in different states as well. In the distillation of alcohol in the first phase, and if you don't take it out properly, then you're going to, poison people. So what happened to Rodney Marks? Was it an accidental poisoning? I don't think so. No, he'd have just gone, he'd have gone to the doctor and said, look, I've just overdosed on alcohol, and this is what's happened. Or somebody would have found him or said something. Was it suicide? Well, that's a bit of a bad way of committing suicide, right? Was it a voluntary poisoning? Do you think he drugged himself? Well, if you're going to drug yourself, then you don't go to the doctor and say that you haven't had a drop to drink for 38 hours. So perhaps we're talking about the perfect murder. After so many years, the centre now no longer has that telescope. It's got the same facilities, but Rodney Marks will just remain in our memories, and we'll never know what happened to him.